Earlier this year, Pierre Shevchevsky traveled out to Ukraine for reporting on the situation out there with the invasion by Russian troops. He was an experienced cameraman. He was working this time and had for several years with Fox News. Also, Pierre had been in Afghanistan. He'd been in Syria. He'd been in Iraq and most of the conflict zones, including the Balkans as well. Within days of him arriving, within weeks of him arriving, Pierre and his colleague at Fox News, Shasha, were reporting on the outskirts of Kyiv when they came under fire from Russian forces. Both were killed. What happens next has been the mission of his wife, Michelle Stanton, as she tries to find out what happens and comes to terms with Pierre's death. Delighted to be joining me live on the line from the UK, Michelle Stanton. Good morning to you, Michelle.
Good morning, Giles.
Yes, so just before we start, just to let the listeners know, Michelle and I have known each other for 40 years and we have nicknames. So you very nearly called me Gerbil, didn't you?
Gerbil, I did. Yes. I apologise.
It's quite all right, Mousy. It's all right. It is good to see you, my darling. So...
You too, Gerbil.
Right then. Okay, we'll get the Gerbil and Mousy out the way first.
Right.
Let's just talk about Pierre and how you guys met, because wasn't it Sarajevo, wasn't it? I'm trying to.
No, it wasn't in Sarajevo. We met in London.
Right.
I was the media director for a children's charity called War Child. And I used to drive aid with a truck with aid out to Bosnia every month. And I would film all the projects that we were doing in Mostar, Sarajevo, Tuzla, all around the country during the war. And I came back and his best friend had come to work with us, Stefan Smith, who'd just come back from Afghanistan. And I was on my way to Afghanistan to film there a project that we were doing. And he introduced me to Pierre. And we had matching cameras and it was love at first sight. And in fact, I actually got caught sniffing his jacket in the office. He used to rock up on his motorbike and he had this sheepskin jacket, denim jacket with a leather jacket over the top. And he used to stand it up in the corner by the edit suite. And one day the head of the diabetic project walked in and caught me sniffing it. So I felt bad when I met him. He played hard to get.
Yeah, and War Child, of course, didn't War Child do the famous Pavarotti and U2, wasn't that?
Yes. Yeah, it started off actually, Brian Eno was our first musical patron. And obviously being an amazing producer, everybody wanted to be involved with Brian Eno. And that's how we got, we had David Bowie, we had U2, Bono and The Edge, and loads and loads and loads of other musicians who just want a Meatloaf, one of my personal favourites. And Pavarotti came along and used to do concerts for us in Italy for the children of whatever country we were doing projects in.
Yeah.
So that was quite interesting.
And indeed. And for those who haven't seen pictures of Pierre, let's just get the one thing out of the moustache. Now let's get the moustache out of the way, because it was quite something, wasn't it?
His moustache was infamous. His moustache was recognised around the world. There was a very funny story. He looked like Borat in the early days.
Yeah.
We've been together 27, 28 years. And in the early days, he looked like Borat and everybody would laugh. And one day he was with this famous American host called Bill O'Reilly, who was doing a surprise visit to the American troops in Iraq. And private plane, Pierre comes backwards walking down the plane because he's filming Bill O'Reilly, and he turns around and all the troops shout, Borat! And they were so excited that Borat had come to visit them, and you can imagine Bill O'Reilly was not best pleased.
No. And as he got older and the moustache got greyer, he was like a little bit more Einstein. It was remarkable.
Absolutely, yes. During lockdown, I noticed that we'd be walking along on our daily walks when we were in lockdown, and people in the street would shout out, Einstein! Oh. So yes, he did look like Einstein at the end. But the moustache really should have its own website. I think that's something we should start after this show. Yeah. And of course, you two
to say that you got lots of some jinx and adventures. I mean, the trip across Iran, which I remember you going, and because we were sitting, I think, in Roberto's on the King's Road, and you were saying, "I'm going off to do this," and I was like, "You are mad," because that was Ayatollah. I mean, not that it's obviously from seeing yesterday's incredible protest by the Iranian national team, but at that time it was a thing for mad men and women, and you two were the proverbial madman and woman across Afghanistan on motorcycles. You disguised as a man.
Yes, well, we didn't. So yes, we set off on November 5th, 1997 to go around the world on our motorbikes. Now, I didn't actually know how to ride a motorbike.
Yeah.
But being the stubborn person that I was not going to sit on the back of Pierre's. So he said, fine, but you have to have the same bike as me. So I went off and I bought myself a BMW R80 GS. Yeah. Very large, very
huge,
high.
Huge. And you're not, I mean, and you're quite petite, aren't you, Mousy?
Yes, I am. Yes. I'm challenged.
Vertically.
I'm a little bit challenged, yes. Vertically challenged. So, so there I am with this bike, red. Obviously, goes faster. Mm-hmm. And I had to take my license. And luckily, I passed 2 days before we set off on our round-the-world trip. And, I almost died on the way to Dublin to see his family. Didn't realise what trucks were. And then, we crossed through all of Europe, and we got into Iran. I did pretend in Iran to be an Irish man because I'm actually an American Jew, female. So I pretended to be Michael from Dublin or Mikko. And we met this incredible Ayatollah Tahiri in Iran who invited us. So it was just unheard of. He invited us to join him for Friday prayers. And we were allowed up on his podium to take photos and to film it. Yeah. And unfortunately, he started asking me about Catholicism, and I had to admit to him that actually I was a Jew and I didn't really know much about Catholicism at all.
Apart from you pretending to be Irish, I mean, Pierre was Irish, and he was very proud of it. And I caught some of your interview in RTE last week, and explaining that because it was his family, he had a colourful family background. It was French Irish.
Well, his father was Polish, and they had to. He was actually a refugee because they had to leave during the Second World War because his father worked for the Polish Free Air Force. So they crossed Europe by any means possible, including foot, to get out of Europe, Nazi-occupied Europe, and he met Pierre's mother, who was French, in Ireland, where he had won a scholarship to study architecture. And yes, they met. So they were very colourful. So Pierre was actually premature. So he was born in Paris, but he never considered himself French, even though his name was Pierre Zakrzewski. He considered himself an Irishman. And he was very, very proud of that fact. And it worked really well in his favour because the Irish are loved around the world. And he'd rock up in Afghanistan, his favourite country on earth, and arrive at some checkpoint, and he'd say, "My name's Pierre Zakrzewski and I'm Irish, let me through." And he'd literally end up having kebabs and chai with the Taliban. And in fact, recently, when he was back there in August last year, he got the Taliban to the fun fair, and it went viral online. He got one of them in a bumper car and 4 of them in a Ferris wheel, and he was sort of like holding their AK-47s while he filmed them.
Taliban and a Ferris wheel sounds like the name of the best alternative band we've never had yet, doesn't it? Let's face it. And
he had a way with everybody, and that was his Irish charm. Talking
about Afghanistan, and he went back there as the place fell, and he got people out. I mean, he wasn't one of those camera, and we'll talk about this in a second, but he was there. He'd been there several times. He said it was his favorite country, and he really did work to get people out.
He did. Yes. He would work by day, filming the pullout of the Brits and the Americans, which was a complete shambles. And they actually worked with the Taliban to keep people away from the gate. But unfortunately, there was some ISIS-K who bombed. They did a drone attack, and there were some bombings, suicide bombers. But Pierre, at night, after he had filmed and edited and done everything else, he would go out and he would help rescue people that needed to get out of the country and get them to the airport. And he managed to save 1,400 people from the Taliban and get them out of the country. And that was after the British and the Americans had pulled out.
I saw it when we spoke last night, or we left a message last night. It's very easy for people to say, anybody who goes into a war zone, war correspondent, war journalists, they're sort of junky adrenaline, they're junky, they're adrenaline junkies. They have to do it. They can't do anything else. Pierre could do other stuff, but he believed that getting this message was particularly important. Getting these images was particularly important.
A lot of people have called Pierre a war junkie, and that's just not true. He was a truth teller. He actually, at heart, he was a humanitarian first and foremost, and he was a truth teller. And he used his camera as a tool to tell what was really going on and to give a voice to people that didn't have a voice, and also to show what was going on to the powers that be, to try and make a difference. So he wasn't just a photojournalist. He was a humanitarian. He cared very, very deeply and very passionate about the stories that he covered.
He went out to Ukraine he'd been working with Fox News, because since the invention of smartphones and social media, when you and I got involved with the game back in the 90s, it was a different beast whatsoever. You had to get the stuff back and now, of course, people can get things back almost immediately. The reason behind him going to Fox, one of the main reasons, presumably, was the security and the fact that if anything should go wrong, they could get him out.
Yes, and I mean, he was a freelancer at heart. But he realized after Iraq and Syria that it was just too dangerous and too expensive to be a freelancer. So he had been working as a freelancer with Iraq for about 5 years, with Fox for about 5 years in Iraq. And so he went staff for them because, they had the support, they had the security, they had the backup. And actually, in this case, I have to say a huge thank you to Fox, because Pierre was killed along with Sasha in Horenka, just outside the northwest of Kiev, coming back from a story they were shooting. And Benji Hall survived with severe life-changing injuries. But, this was an active war zone, and he'd actually been there for 50 days before he went missing on the 14th of March. And Fox somehow, with the help of a guy called C-Spray from Help Our Allies, Save Our Allies, and some other of the security guards, and the Irish embassy in Poland, and the Ukrainian police, and Fox, and the Irish foreign minister, they managed to get his body out in 5 days from Kiev to the border, which was quite unheard of. It was just unheard of. And I was sitting and waiting for him at the border.
Yeah. I mean, it is the worst thing. I mean, because I turned on my social media, and Clarissa Walden, who I've interviewed, and who is now, Clarissa, and there was a picture of Pierre on my social media, on her social media, and I'm like, what's Pierre doing on that? And that's how
they were good friends. Yes, Clarissa was at the funeral actually, and the wake.
Yeah. And I was like, what's Pierre doing on Clarissa's feet? And then I looked down, and and that's how I found out. But
I'm sorry. That's a horrible way to find out.
But Mish, how? How did you? Tell me a little bit about, if you can, the mechanics, because obviously it's the missing, and you don't, and you presumably you talked about this, and we've been doing this for a long time now. So
I found out because on March 14th in the evening, I got a call from Suzanne Scott, the CEO of News Corp. Excuse me, need more coffee here.
Go for it. You can always need more. Oh, it's a Tigger mug. It's a Tigger mug.
Tigger, sure is. Although that's copyrighted.
Okay.
So I got a call from the Suzanne Scott, the CEO of News Corp UK. Fox is part of this big company, News Corp America, News Corp UK. So he'd been missing for 5 hours. And it's standard operating procedures to call when people have been missing for a certain amount of time. And I didn't worry too much because Pierre had been missing before, he'd been kidnapped, you know,
as you do.
And I just assumed that he was hunkered down because it was curfew and he was going to show up after curfew. And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell his family because I didn't think there was anything to worry about because he had 9 lives. He always came home. And I got another call at 12 hours to say that he was still missing. And at that point, obviously I hadn't slept. At that point, I also found out there was a 36-hour curfew being put in Kyiv. And I thought, well, if he's in a ditch somewhere bleeding out, he's just not going to make it. So I started phoning every single journalist I knew on the ground from every network and every security guy from every different security company. And it shows how much Pierre was loved amongst the news community because they hunkered down together to see what they could do to find him. And then at 20 hours, I got a call to say they'd found him in the morgue in Kiev, and they had positively identified him. And it was a real shock because none of us could really believe it. Yeah.
And like you said, he always came back. And also, you know, Ben was, as you said, he suffered life-changing injuries. And, you know, he left a message, he's left video messages and whatever, but he's obviously a long way from recovery. And Sasha, the young Ukrainian, 24 years old, the girl, 24. I mean, that's just, you know, and your heart breaks.
It does, actually, because she would have been 25 on the 3rd or 4th of November, I believe. And I've been in touch with her on-off boyfriend who, you know, first of all, she was 24. She was passionate about her country. She was passionate about helping save her country. And I know that she would have gone on to be an incredible journalist. But sadly, her life was cut short. And I was really lucky because I had a body, and a body makes such a difference because you have something tangible that you can have a funeral and say goodbye. But her parents were so unlucky because all they got were a foot and a hand, and they couldn't believe it. It's just absolutely awful, absolutely awful. And her boyfriend is planning on building a music therapy center for her in her name after the war, and also a statue. So I'm trying to help because of the Pavarotti Music Center in Bosnia.
Sure. I did a charity fundraising event shortly after, literally about 10 days after I got the news. And it's obviously for Ukraine. And I met some of the Ukrainian association down here. And everybody knew the story, all the Ukrainians. I mean, you think, and I said, a friend of mine was Pierre, and they just literally stopped and went, oh, wow. And Sasha. Yeah. So, I mean, they became sort of national figures. It's the only time I've actually ever done because you know how noisy it is down here in Spain. It's the only time I've ever done a gala, and I told the story, and they actually you could literally have heard the pin drop for that evening. So
I had a similar one recently. Pierre was awarded posthumously a European Award for Investigative and Judicial Journalism in Naples. And it was the same. I had a simultaneous translator because my Italian is non-existent.
Really?
Yeah, well, yeah.
And, you don't put pineapple on a pizza.
Yeah, exactly. No, I don't. And they were all journalists. They were all investigative journalists, but they were also the Eurojustice people. And these are hardcore journalists, and some of them had also been working against the mafia.
Yeah, I saw the clip, yeah.
Yeah, and so, you know, these were hardcore, and I was talking, and I cried a little bit because, you know, it's very difficult, 5 cameras, you know, it was very difficult not to cry a little bit at the end. And the room was silent, absolutely silent, and these men in the audience were crying, absolutely. And they came up to me afterwards and said, could we post your speech on our Eurojust website because it's so poignant.
As I said, I saw the funeral because it was live streamed. So I saw, and So the mechanics kick in, don't they? At this point, I mean, you say you got Pierre back, and then there was the. I mean, it was almost a state funeral. We had the Polish ambassador, the French ambassador,
yes,
live streamed. The speeches were great. The rugby story was hysterical. I mean, and the love and affection, even though watching it sort of 2,000 miles away on a mobile phone up in the casita, watching it, it was like wow.
Yeah, it was. The family and I discussed it, and we decided to make a statement with his funeral. We actually had to turn down President Macron, who wanted to come, because I didn't want it to turn into that level of security.
Sure.
It was bad enough for the ambassadors. The Taoiseach couldn't make it because he had COVID, so he sent his camp to aid. And there were ambassadors from every country apart from France. But the Ukrainian ambassador was just wonderful. She was such a lovely lady. She gave me a huge hug afterwards and apologized. And I said, no, why are you apologizing? He died doing what he loved, and we should be apologizing because we're not doing enough to help your country. And we need to do more. Now,
it would have been very easy for you to sit back and go and grieve. And my goodness, you deserve to. But you've been doing interviews. You've been in the Washington Post, and I read that article and just went, bloody hell, to put it mildly, because that was an incredible. I mean, I use words stronger than that, obviously, but the way that the interview came across, and also obviously there's the pictures, there's the jackets, and there's bits and pieces in the flat where you are at the moment, and for people who didn't know him, it's a hard read. For people who knew him and loved him, it floors you. So why? I mean, what was the? What were you hoping to achieve with A, the interview with the Irish media, and B, obviously the interview with the Washington Post, like the major US news outlet?
Well, it started with the Irish media, obviously, as soon as the news broke at 20 hours. Unfortunately, it was leaked on Twitter, before I had a chance to reach all of his friends. So the Irish press, of course, it was the first Irishman to be killed in Ukraine, and he was a well-known figure in Ireland. He was
He's a well-known figure everywhere. Trust me, this week.
Well-loved and well-known figure. So it started with that. But I'd been working with Jeremy Barr from the Washington Post since April on this story. And we kept going deeper and deeper because I was looking for the answers to what actually happened. Because unfortunately, it was the first time ever that they weren't with their security detail. And they weren't going to the front line. They were literally going a mile up the road to film a burnt-out village. And they were with the Azov Brigade, the media press guys from the Azov Brigade, who were actually digging trenches around Kiev, defensive trenches. And they weren't allowed to film it for obvious reasons, because they thought the Russians were invading Kiev. So they carried on up the road for a mile, and it wasn't safe because at that point we already knew that journalists were being targeted by the Russians. Pierre had seen a friend of his killed, Brent Renaud, the day before. He was shot in the neck at a checkpoint in Irpin, and the cameraman, Juan, was shot in the lower back. And so they all already knew, and the Sky News team had been attacked as well. So they already knew that journalists are being targeted by the Russians, and their vehicle, their had press all over it, because press is important to keep you safe. You think normally in a war zone, press would keep you safe on your vehicle. So the Azov Brigade wouldn't let the press vehicle go forward because it was too dangerous, and also a convoy of 2 vehicles is a target. So there wasn't room for the security guy to get in the vehicle. They needed Sasha because she was a translator. They needed Benji because he was a presenter, the correspondent. And they needed Pierre to do the filming. So, yeah, they came back. We know that they were hit at a checkpoint. I went over to get his body because I am stubborn. And I fought with his employers because there was no way I wanted suits on the plane. It was going to be me and his friend and bureau chief, Dragon, who had worked with him in Iraq as a freelancer and also worked in Bosnia. So we went together to get his body and bring him back. And I interviewed all of the security guys on the ground to find out what had happened, because I'm also a journalist and I need to know. And it didn't add up. And I got information from through them from this guy, Commander Romanov, who's a Ukrainian military man, who was the one who found Benji and saved his life, really. And also had dash cam footage of the burnt out vehicle and had claimed to see the explosion. And I'd seen the footage and I didn't see any smoke coming out and of the vehicle. And I thought, well, if you'd seen the explosion, why weren't you there right away? So I just needed to know the truth. And I'm still searching for some truths. Between Jeremy and I, we got an awful lot of information, and that's why it took so long for the article to come out. Kept pushing back the release date because there was more information coming in. But the one thing that I'm still trying to find out is, I understand now why the security weren't with them. And Benji has told me what happened. I've been to his house. We've talked face to face about the incident. He's writing a book, partly therapeutic. And I need to know who found Pierre and took him to the morgue, because I need to say thank you. Because I could have been in a situation where there was no body and I would never, ever, ever have known what had happened to him.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm still searching for. I'm still searching for answers. And I'm that stubborn type of journalist that needs to know everything, every single thing.
Absolutely. Be more Pierre.
Hashtag be more like Pierre.
Be more like Pierre.
It was coined that phrase. And we have these cards we've printed. We printed some memorial cards with his photo and poems. And the list was just a very, very simple list. Not sure if we've got time for it.
We've got time, Mousy.
Okay, so it was hashtag be more like Pierre. So we're starting this online presence. We've got Instagram, we've got Facebook. And his little sister wrote it when he was still missing. So I've finally told her at 12 hours that Pierre was missing and that she should warn the family, because I think this might be it and he might not be coming home this time. So she stayed up, obviously, and she's very good at lists. So she coined the phrase hashtag be more like Pierre. And it's a simple list about what Pierre was like. And we're living by this now. Help others, be brave, love your family, your friends, travel, speak up, do what you love, take risks, laugh, care, be the best you can be, because he was the best. And I think very, very simple, but so poignant.
And what's next for you, Mish? What is, because obviously this has been, it's 8 months now, 9 months since the
8 months and 8 days,
yeah,
to be precise.
Yeah, sometimes I thought you might know exactly.
Yeah, no. I'm fundraising.
Yeah.
Two things. I mean, I made a promise that I would keep Pierre and Sasha's legacies alive.
Yeah.
So we're working with the Frontline Club, which used to be a news agency that Pierre started his career with, selling his footage as a freelancer from Afghanistan, and where we actually got it together in their edit suite. Where we used to get their downtime, the edit suite for charities.
If edit suites could talk, the things they would say.
Oh gosh, yes, they would.
Indeed.
But no, he was giving us all his Afghan footage for the project that we were working on. So we were in the edit suite from Friday night to Sunday night.
Yeah.
When it's downtime, that's when the charities get the best rates or free edit suites. And so I'm working with them and with News Corp Fox to set up a bursary for both Pierre, for young freelance photojournalists, and also for Sasha, for young freelance journalists, where they'll have mentors and they'll have hostile environment training and awards and a cash prize. So that's one thing. So I'm keeping their legacies alive that way. But I'm also raising money, because my last promise to Pierre was that I would take aid over to Ukraine, because I asked him, how can I help? And he said, things are bad here and they're only going to get worse. Get a truck, drive some aid over. So I've been in touch with humanitarian organization in Ukraine, and they need ambulances. So I'm raising money on Just Giving to raise money for ambulances and medical supplies, so they're fully kitted out, and also to get them some generators because they really need them. So that's what I'm working on at the moment, and it's very time consuming.
Yeah, indeed.
Keep me busy because that's the only way I can keep going.
Yeah. But also, I mean, I've obviously, there's been the boat, there's been the trips, there's been, exactly.
Yeah, we've redone the barge. Pierre and I argued for 3 years on what wood we were going to have on the inside of our Dutch barge. So it's almost finished. Beautiful silver wood that I always wanted.
Yeah.
But we've actually we've painted hashtag Be More Like Pierre on the side of the barge, and his name and this logo that one of his nephews drew of the hair and the moustache, which you don't need a face, you just have the hair and the moustache and everybody knows it's Pierre.
Exactly.
So we go up and down the Thames and people recognise that, and it's good publicity.
If people want to find out more, Mouse, and find you on the gram or to the Just Giving, I mean, I'll put a link on my socials and obviously on Talk Radio Europe socials. But where can they find you, and where can they find more information about Be More Like Pierre?
Well, they can go to Instagram or Facebook and go to hashtag Be More Like Pierre. And that they'll find the story of how Carola, his little sister, came up with the hashtag Be More Like Pierre line, and a little bit about him. And then on the Just Giving page, it's Just Giving Pierre Zakrzewski. But I warn your viewers to check how much Just Giving are taking, because there's a slider for the percentage.
Is there? Right then.
Yes, okay. I just found that out. So those are the places that you can find out more about him.
Right then. Now, so okay, what I'd like to do then in that case is keep me up to date with the what you're up to and the trucks, and I got these visions of you with a container load of ambulances or generators thundering down towards Kiev at some point very, very soon.
Well, we've got war crimes tribunals going on, and they won't let me. At the moment, I'm still the key witness until Benji's able to talk. But so at the moment, I'm not actually allowed to go into Ukraine. But now that Benji's out of hospital and talking, I'm hoping I can get into Ukraine and deliver them personally by hand.
Good grief.
Netflix actually is giving us a large donation. A friend of mine's the chief makeup and hair designer for Bridgerton.
Yeah. And
she's just won an Emmy, and Erica Ockfist, and she's very kindly asked Bridgerton and Netflix to give me money, which they are doing.
Absolutely.
So I'm hoping to reach our target soon. Absolutely superb.
Like the mousey on the loose in Kiev. What could possibly go wrong? Listen. It's I wanted to do this interview for a long time. It's obviously difficult for both of us, but Michelle Ross Stanton, Mousy, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Giles. It's been good talking to you.